Welcome to the conversation at airsafe.com. I'm your host, Todd Curtis. On June 25th, 2016, I had an interview with Rudy Maxa of Rudy Maxa's World, where we discuss a recent series of events where aircraft flights were delayed or canceled due to high temperatures. I gave a basic explanation of the physics of flight, as well as gave an insight as to why this sort of news might be much more prominent in the media than it would have been 10 or 15 years ago.
Live around the globe, it's time for Rudy Maxa's World with the Carries on the SSI Radio Network.
You are listening to America's most widely syndicated radio travel show, by far, I might add. Hey, let's start with this question of planes that don't take off because it's too hot outside. Dr. Todd Curtis is an aviation expert, founder and publisher of airsafe.com, all one word, airsafe.com. It's a site that concerns itself with air safety, security, and policy. Tom, welcome back to the show. You were just here the other week, weren't you?
Yes, indeed. I'm glad to be back on an occasion that doesn't involve a plane crash.
That's true. It's a good point. So what apparently high temperatures are a consideration when flying planes. What's the issue here?
Well, absolutely. It comes down to a simple question of physics. The air is a fluid in a sense that it has various physical characteristics, and when it's hot, it's less dense. And that leads to the fact that planes would need longer runways in order to take off. And also, the engines don't operate as efficiently as when the air is cooler. So you could have a situation where with certain airports, where a combination of the runway length, the temperature, the weight of the aircraft, and how close it is to maximum weight, it could be a safety consideration where the airplane may not be able to take off and land at certain airports at certain times.
And everybody in the business of flying knows this equation, basically.
Indeed. And again, it's a fairly complex set of equations because aircraft, all modern airliners, are basically very computerized when it comes to programming in what the airplane does at takeoff and landing. And there could be some situations, not to mention the fact that there may be a combination of heat and humidity where it's at the ragged edge of where that aircraft operates. It's possible in some cases that the manufacturers may not have a recommendation for operating in certain temperature conditions. So between that and the weight of the aircraft and other considerations also, wind could come into play. Typically, pilots like to take off in a headwind. It makes it easier for the airplane to gain airspeed. But if it turns out that particular day there's a tailwind component of some sort, that can make it even more difficult to take off from the same runway that would be perfectly fine if the temperature were 10 or 20 degrees lower.
Isn't that a little counterintuitive to us novices? If you've got tail behind you, wind coming from behind you, pushing your tail.
It is a bit counterintuitive, but it comes down to the wind has to be in your face for it to have an effect on the wings. And if the wind isn't blowing as hard in your face, your wings are not going to be as efficient when it comes to generating lift.
Lift, exactly. I think that's the key word. And you mentioned that humidity is a factor as well. How does this? Does this happen every summer? Is this commonplace, or is it really, really rare that it's too hot and humid to take off?
Well, it's rare that it happens because you have to have fairly high temperatures, well over 105 degrees. Now, this is the kind of thing that happens regularly in some desert locations like Phoenix and Tucson. But if you have a heat wave in a particular part of the country, it could be happening in cities where it has not happened that frequently. And another consideration, which didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago, nowadays, if you have any sort of problem with an airline, either a part of the country or a particular aircraft, with social media, that news can be transmitted around the world by individual passengers. So the news of these kinds of problems gets out so much more efficiently now.
I see. Perfect. Todd, thanks so much for stopping by and explaining this to us.
Well, thanks again for having me.
You can read Todd Curtis's writings at airsafe.com. He's an aviation expert. He was a former Boeing safety engineer, worked on the 777, by the way.
For more information on aviation safety and security, please visit airsafe.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.